All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this, the last recorded tutorial of 2025. I had some thought about what to discuss on this, the final lecture, and thought in recent weeks I've gone over a few different topics, all of which focused on sketching over the course of an hour and 15 minutes. And so today I want to talk about drawing with a bit of speed and not focusing on an hour-long drawing that really looks at a lot of detail. This is more about setting up perspective quickly and just kind of rapid fire getting on paper the basics. So today we're going to do three different sketches, all subject matters of the same architect. They build in complexity from very simple to, so it's kind of just a simple partial corner of a building all the way to more of what we've been looking at in the past few weeks, which is a full building from ground level, looking at it from the base to the top, the whole, we're capturing the entirety of the building in one street face. So to start things off, all three of these images are by John Ronan, and they are small projects. The last one is going to be a little bit larger, but still all of them are very manageable, simple, straightforward perspectives, very rectilinear, kind of looking at simple versions of a play on a box. So in this case, a very, very simple recessed ground floor and then a cantilevered upper level with ETFE, which is these kind of pillows. And so we're just going to spend 10 to 15 minutes on this one. And then in the next one, we're going to spend a little bit more time and then finally building on the concepts of the first two sketches to finally come to the last one. But all of these will, of course, be much shorter than what we had been working on, which were over an hour for each one. These will certainly all be much faster. Just the essence of what these are, nothing more than just simple line work and shade. So again, we're all back down to the ground, whereas last week we were looking at aerials, which may have seemed a bit overwhelming, and that's why I don't spend too much time on that because usually we experience buildings from a low level, and what you will be asked to do for the majority of any visualization, if you want to do a quick drawing of something, it's how a person would experience a project from eye level or how you would see it normally. And so, okay, jumping into this before wasting too much time on explanations, I'll just pull this off to the side. And these are going to be smaller kind of vignette sketches. I'm not going to take up the entirety of the page here, but I can keep the image just off the side of the screen here so you can see kind of one for one how this is coming together. So right off the top, horizontal horizon line. And we can see that easily. There's actually two people here, so we know that the horizon line is right at their headline. The recess of the ground floor and the horizontality of the cantilevered edge for the top mass. And so we're really just matching those angles. The angle of where there's a recess, this is set back in every direction. And we're much, much flatter on the base because we're closer to the horizon line on the ground floor. Just remember that our horizon line and the vanishing points are just off. So if I were actually to continue these all the way over, they would be right about in the middle of my image. So then I can come up here and just draw almost connecting the dots. I'm making this smaller so I can do this. And then the rest of it is really just, again, always referencing that point on the horizon line. It's more of a 1 point perspective. This horizontal might be vanishing down along the horizon line to a vanishing point so far off the page to the right that it's virtually flat. And then looks like there's a little bit of a gravel base. And then this ETFE is divided into thirds. There's a metal panel base, top and bottom with small joints for the metal panel. Window wall, which is expressed vertically. always remembering to keep those proportions equal. So if we have three equal parts for this, we want to make sure that when we're here at the back or on the right-hand side, we're keeping that as close as possible to a third as well. And then if we want, there's actually some buildings by Mies van der Rohe in the background there. We could indicate those lightly as well with much less emphasis on line weight there, but still following the same, the parallel faces, so they'll behave similarly. So for our first drawing, we've got pretty much the basics. This is it. And so now I'm going to jump in. I'm going to be using black colored pencil for this. This ETFE, it might be a little difficult to see, but it's actually, if I were to cut a section through it, it's actually, they're kind of like pillows. They look like this in section and then the middle panel. So I'm going to try to emphasize that in the drawing, even though it doesn't look very like it's bowing very much in the photo. I'm just going to add a little bit of that just to emphasize more of that pillowed effect. Very lightly, I'm indicating these joints in the metal panel on the kind of coping condition and the base of the ETFE. And now if I come back, I can add these joints and I'm going to, from this point, I can start to just finish up the line work. And then I'm going to add some tone and that's it for this. Very simple, very quick. So I'm going to focus on the building itself. Context, I'll do it later. I always like to make that the underside of a soffit. I'm using the side of my black colored pencil here. That's getting very little direct light, so I always try to make that darkest. And then here, the ETFE pillow is also getting a little bit of a shadow on the underside, fading up. Through the glass, I'm probably going to have a column here. It's hard to see in the image, but I'm just going to kind of indicate something, a vertical element dark back here. And then the side, again, I could see through the glass. I'm going to just add a little bit of tone there to show that there is a ceiling condition beyond. The depth of the mullion. And I'm just going to add some tone here to the glass itself because it has a bit of a frit or a tint to it. It's darker than the ETFE, so I'm going to show it differently than that. And some mullions in the back, just so you kind of get the idea of some transparency through that. And in the background, just very, very lightly that Meese building. A little bit of a shadow on that. And the ground plane. And I don't have much of a sky here to mention, but I do want to just add some tone there because when I add that little bit of sky here, I could do this in graphite as well because I can then use my blending pencil or even my finger to kind of make that all look more uniform. And this, by doing this, I'll make that white of the aluminum panel stand out more. Just come back and spread that. And just coming right back just a little bit, add a little bit more edge, profile edge with my line work there. And kind of a stylistic choice here. This building is really bleeding off to the side of the page, so sometimes I just come back and add a little bit of a border. All right, so that's the first one. There it is. That's the real quick. The idea of being able to draw something in very little time, just getting the idea, and you can see there that relationship. Lightening up some of this, the underside where the glass looks very, very dark, just adding just enough to kind of give the idea of that window wall in the back with some transparency to it. So that's the first. Very, very simple, easy to start things off. And we're going to step it up a little bit. Now we're going to move on to the next project, same architect. This time we're going to look at the Poetry Foundation. So this one, again, very, very simple, rectilinear, basically a curtain wall with a box within it and a metal screen. So it's kind of the different levels of enclosure wrapping one another and a base, a few steps. So this kind of frame is wrapping around the entirety of this glass box. So I'm just going to keep this right near the edge of the screen here to start off with. Again, we're at ground level. And in this case, we actually can't see the vanishing point is right here at the edge of the image. Everything is collapsing to that point if you just continue those lines. So it's important to just match right off the top and make sure that you're close. This angle very much is just off of vertical. So almost straight, but vertical, but it's angled just slightly up to the left. And that runs off the top of your page. The side of the screen, and again, just connecting these, always being checking yourself so that you're not just making things more complicated or adding more complexities where they don't exist. Always just referencing back. And now this is a 2-point perspective. Again, in this case, the other point is well off to the left. So in this case, unless you have a super long piece of paper or some yardstick or something, it's just going to be matching that proportion and the angle. So like that. And then, so now we have the screen started here, and I'm going to come back and now add this glass box beyond. I'm not going to worry about the structure that's coming out to grab onto it just yet. That'll come later. Vertical, straight vertical, no vanishing there. Paying special attention to, again, the relationships here. I came down a bit low there, make sure that I'm not, I have to remember I have to leave enough room here. There's going to be a step. And I always want to make sure that I'm checking myself against what I actually see. And I've noticed now that I might have to adjust something because I can see right here that that front step comes down to about here, but you can see the relationship is more like this in the relationship of the image that I have printed, which then tells me that I have to push this out a little bit. I mean, I could continue the way I've been going, but if I want to be true to the image, I want to make an adjustment here and say that I actually want to get a little bit more of this side. Which simply means this has to extend and then come down. Few steps. Remember to try to get those relationships somewhat accurate so that they reach down to the foreground here. There's a cutout for a small ramp in a base condition for this screen to fall in on top of. Again, check those. And then I see this box comes parallel to those, very close to those, the underside of the screen there, and then it stops short, runs down to grade, and there's a small corner condition that I can see here, right about where this ramp comes down and this guardrail comes across. And then there's going to be some of that foreground landscaped elements here. And the screen is somewhat transparent, so I can see that there is some backup structure here with a subgirt and framing beyond. I can see through the screen to find that. But then the screen has quite a bit of density as you turn the corner, I'm looking at it on an oblique angle, so I don't see those through the screen very well. But it looks like the screen is pulled off of the subframing beyond, so I can indicate some of those frames coming down along the top. And now I can finally go back and add those pieces of lateral support that come off the screen into the glass box. And then when I come back here to this glass box, I see right away that the emphasis again on the vertical, and it's broken up into three equal parts. So I just take that box, divide it into three, and then this line, I also divide that into three. Hmm, connecting that corner to the vanishing point. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panels. Or 8 if I decide to. Okay. Okay, so that's basically the limit of setting this one up in quick time. So then I'm going to do this one with ink. And just following. In this case, I'm actually going to start with out of order a little bit. I'm going to start with some of the landscaped elements, just because they're in front of some of the curtain wall, and I can indicate these really quickly without too much effort, and then I can go draw the curtain wall behind it and lift my pen as I go behind, knowing that this is in the way. I'm going to still show the curtain wall beyond, but I'm not going to give it as much intentional detail, the kind of continuality of those lines as they get to this, I'll start to lift my pen. Sometimes it might be more helpful to draw a simple shape, mimicking the image that I have printed here, and then just using that as a base to work around. There's not a lot of density to the leaf or coverage in these branches, so there's going to be a lot of transparency anyway. So even if I were drawing it true to the image and I was saying I'm going to draw it just as dense as it is in reality, I would still be able to see through this very much into the curtain wall beyond. Okay, so then I'm going to start from the inside and work my way out. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm using ink here to indicate the exterior wall enclosure. And then I'm going to do a little bit of this interior. You can see where it's kind of this wood-clad box, which is recessed from the enclosure with a illuminated surface on the top. I'm going to do that in graphite so that you get the idea that this is uh, behind glass. It won't be represented in the same line weight or same line types as I'm doing for the exterior. Rather than, even though these are one continuous mullion that run all the way down, I'm stopping at the horizontal because it's a long straight line. And by stopping at a horizontal break, I can reset my wrist and continue down to the next mullion, which is this one. So it's a kind of natural break that kind of allows me to reset my hand. Okay, then I'm going to come back and continue on the ground plane where I have these two small steps. This is now the beginning of that kind of frame for the shroud or curtain that wraps the exterior at the sidewalk. Just following those lines that I looked back on and decided, yes, those are accurate enough that I can go back and add my final line work to them. The railing for this small ramp. Okay, so then I have the base here. You can always go back and add more detail to this depending on how much time that you have or you want to get how much speed you want to work on this. This would be a smaller detail. Adding the first go of the line work is the most important. That will give you the basis that you can always come back and add more to it. The very small, this is like a corrugated uh, metal screen that is held off of with a frame. So that's kind of coming out. You can see through it. It's perforated as well. The perforations allow you to see the subframing on this side. But if you turn and come down this side, then you kind of lose all of that. So that's why you can see this horizontal, that's the corrugation, kind of like that. And then it's corrugated, it's perforated, corrugated and perforated. That's what gives you this effect. So I'm just going to show this idea that you can see through it, and then I'm going to add some additional line work to give that transparency to it. Just remember that each one of these is also going down to this, so I may have actually been getting a little lazy myself. Remember, those are all coming back down to that same vanishing point. And here again, I'm lifting my pen, trying to say that this is a minor line that even though I'm not using a very fine line type, I'm indicating that it's broken, meaning it's light. It's not emphasized as strongly as some of these profile edges, which are very consistent all the way across. And some of the subframing, I'll just indicate the underside. You could actually look between the very edge of the screen and the subframing, and maybe a few joints in the sidewalk. So that's really the basics here. I can always add a little bit more definition to some of the screen and other mullions, or I can come back and do that only with tone. I am going to actually come back. Each one of these mullions, I'm actually seeing the front, the face that is on the exterior wall, and then there's also the body of the mullion, which extends into the interior space. So I'm adding a second line just so that there's an understanding that this mullion isn't just a single line. It actually has some depth, and at this scale, I should be able to see some of that. And then once I've got that done, I can go back and I'm going to go to graphite and indicate some of the elements from interior. Okay, so with my, well, I actually want to use a little bit softer. This is the roof, the depth of the roof here is actually allowing for this small recess and upturn in the ceiling plane. There is a column which is expressed on the interior here. So this is a poetry foundation, so there is actually what looks to be bookshelves in the back. But more importantly, there is at this elevation another box within the glass enclosure. I can show that in shadow as well by using the side of my pencil. And this face is actually all reflective. This, I can see that there's some of a dark, uh, it looks to be part of the box. I can continue that. Or it could be a reflection of the screen on the outside, but just for simplicity, I'm just going to continue that darker shade of where that box beyond is existing here. And then you could even go so far as to just add some reflectivity in the glass so that that's kind of showing. It almost looks like an extension of that lateral piece that's coming to the building there. This is kind of a reflection of the screen in the front. And if you want, you can even add a little bit of the depth of the mullion like this as well. This side looks to be mostly in shadow. Then I'm going to come back now with my black colored pencil to add more contrast to the foreground. So these small trees, I'm going to add some depth to that. And the underside of these, this will receive quite a bit of dark as well. That's the underside that isn't receiving much light. And here, this will be receiving a bit more. As I get to the corner here, I'm going to increase the pressure on my pencil, on the colored pencil to show that. And then as I come down, I want this to lighten up just slightly as I move the pencil down the page. And here again, the underside is dark. And the vertical element of the stair, because the top in this case, so the underside gets quite a bit of dark, but the top is receiving a lot more direct light. So I'm going to make that light and, add a little bit of shadow here to give that surface some cast shadow on it from the elements in the foreground. And then I'm going to probably go back to graphite now and just do a wash here to indicate that there is a screen. I don't have to get too detailed on those perforations or how to represent it. It's just shown as a screen that I can see partially through, but not entirely. So this is just some of that tone to give the idea of some kind of enclosure. Now I just want to come back a little bit more and add some line weight before I finish this one out. And I keep misplacing my kneaded eraser. I made a mess over here. But you've seen me in the past do that little trick at the end, trying to kind of differentiate some elements like with color. In this case, it might be worth adding a little bit of color, maybe a blue here to indicate sky, because right now I'm going to add line weight here to show the edge of this. I can get pretty dark with that. Profile edge, again, gets the heaviest line weight. And I'm going to come back with a little bit of sky just to show It's opened up a little bit just right there, just very subtle. And I'm just, if I'm going to add a little bit of a frame to this one too. Because then I can come back and these kind of partial images, I like to kind of capture the edge there so that it kind of anchors it on the page. And then I can add tone to kind of complete this side of the drawing. The deepest recesses always get the darker side, of course, and so this one will be more in shadow than the rest. And I can always come back and add a little bit, but there it is. That's the second drawing. So now we've been talking for, I don't know, what has this been, about half an hour? We got two drawings done. So there, that's the Poetry Foundation, and I can now move on to the third and final drawing for the class today. Today we'll be looking at, third and final is going to be the Independence Library, also by John Ronan. Which is this. So this is going to be the third and final is a full building at grade, no landscape, or very, very little. These few trees, you could probably even ignore them. They're not very prominent in the image. So it's really a rectangle with a base window wall, a bit of a foreground building of an older structure, and then this large metal clad building with punched openings. So we're going to just dive right in. This one probably not going to take too much time either. It's very, very simple. Start with that base as always. The foreground is very, very flattened. So in this case, how you want that to sit, if I just mimic exactly the proportions of the page, my first point is going to be off the side. In both cases here, we don't have any vanishing points on or near the page that we're drawing. So we just have to use our proportions and the relationships that we find with the angles. But in reality, it's nothing more than two boxes stacked one on top of the other. But then there's also the foreground older building that just by using the same proportions, that how do we break this up into more manageable parts? Like where does that line come and hit this? How much higher do we have to go? And you can distill this adjacent building, which has a little bit more detail going on with this again, a glass block and some brickwork here at the corner. I'm not going to really dwell on that, so I'm just going to kind of break it down into where we have an upper band of windows and then a lower band, which is kind of like in this glass block and a column in the middle. A rounded corner. So again, here, this is a critical angle that we're going to want to maintain. Which then comes up. And as we get to the point of the building closest to us, we're going to round that off. And then again, working with that same angle, coming back down. So we're not really connecting points now. I'm not looking at something off into the distance. So I'm relying solely on the angles that I see here and mimicking them on my page. So once this is done, we can come back now and start just adding some of the places where we know that there's openings. This is the street edge. Something fun over here is this library owl. Not, you probably don't have to draw that, but I think he's funny, so I'm going to add it. All right, so then what do we have? With this building, there is a small tree here. There is two floors that are close to the base of the building that are under, it looks like there's a kind of reveal of a glass piece that reaches up and over. This comes across with some signage over, down. And then there's one, two, three, four floors above this. It's seemingly a random pattern, so the way I would go about doing this is looking at what's happening closest to the foreground, because then I know that all of these are going to have to be the similar relationships, just condensed a little bit here at the edge of the building to the right. And they seem random, but if you look at them closely, the actual openings are somewhat similar. Maybe the balcony edges are a little bit taller, but I can use the relationships I've started with here and then just bring those lines down. You could start like wherever there's some guidelines that tell you kind of where the middle is, where the bottom edges are. Or you could even start bigger and say that there's the balcony edges, these bigger openings that are more horizontal. But that's what I'm doing here is just focusing on the biggest ideas. And in this case, starting with the front edge, drawing those lines to organize this, and then transitioning to the bigger, colorful balcony openings that can then when I've got those established, I can come back and add some more of the punched openings within it, knowing that they're not going to be, I'm not going to run out of room or anything like that because I've already got the big idea here of these done. them up a little bit. And then I'm going to come back with the punched openings, basically saying how many are there between each one of those larger balconies. Looks like there's only one or two in some cases. And I might have to make adjustments as I go just to see that sometimes a balcony edge could be too long or too short. But at this stage, I'm just planning these out. And then when I come back with my final line work, I can get more refinement there. And then each of these has, and you could of course go back with these quick drawings. I don't tend to do too much color. It's more about the idea of the form. So I'm not going to go back and add, even though these colors are very vibrant, and you're welcome to do that if you happen to have these kind of colors. But I have a limited selection of colors, and I certainly don't have canary yellow, lime green, magenta. So not the kind of colors that I normally use. And there's a few little context buildings down here. Maybe you want to draw some of these street trees. Okay, so this is it. That's the one thing I don't really care for is the angle of this. Sometimes also doing a check, if I look at how flat that is, I really want to flatten that out as well. Okay, so there it is. That's the basics of this one. And so now I'm going to come back in with more final line work. This we're going to spend a little bit more time on because this one has a few more pieces. It's full building, it has more context, but still the ideas of moving quickly through this apply. I'll probably go back to pen. Again, foreground, just you could even, if you don't want to draw all the detail here because this building isn't the focus of the drawing, you could just add a few elements of the form. And for now, just move on to the rest of the library. So that's actually a branch library here with affordable housing above. I don't know if I mentioned that to start with, but I might have called it a library this whole time, and you're thinking, hey, that doesn't look like a library up above. So just starting with those big picture ideas again, the two boxes that are intersecting one another. The reveal and another planted element here that's kind of hiding behind the corner. I'm just going to add these windows because they're simple to, they add a little bit of foreground context. Okay, so then I've got everything set up the way I want, and now the last thing is really just to go back and add those punched opening windows. Always referencing the image and the drawing that you've already created in those lines. So what is it? You could just move from left to right. Some are more horizontal, some are more vertical. No need to really dwell on the proportions of everything, but I will be going back and adding that tone to some of these recesses for the balconies later. This is the entrance to the library. This, I believe, is the entrance to the housing, which is recessed and called out with this kind of colorful cyan pattern. We're not looking for perfection here. These faster drawings, more of the idea behind the architecture. But if you get that primary organization of these banded windows to the vanishing point, they're not going to start drifting in awkward orientations. They're not going up and down where you know that they're not supposed to be. It looks more believable if you start from the top and you get those big ideas down on paper, then the rest of it is really just coming back in and adding more detail and context. So the last thing from a form perspective is just going in and adding those recesses in those very deep balcony edges, which is really just adding a recessed soffit and two sidewalls with a soffit in the back. So it's some of them are off-centered, so it's like an upside down U, and then those two other a diagonal which responds to the vanishing point way off to the left, and then just really quick like that 1, 2, 3, the diagonal, and then the verticals for the backside. I'll draw my owl now. Of course, you don't have to draw this, but I like it. Yeah. With these long lines, it's always, as I mentioned in the past, helpful to move your hand rather than your wrist. right, so the line drawing, this is pretty much it. There might be a little bit you want to do here. There's a railing. It's a little bit difficult to see because it too is perforated and it runs across the entire face of that recessed colored area. But that's a minor thing that you may not have to add anyway. So because this is a very fast drawing, and I'm gonna again add tone to this, um, I'm not gonna color it. You could do that, of course, but I can come back and start with line weight, or I can just start going back in with my graphite to get a little bit more three-dimensionality to it. Because if I leave it just like this, yeah, there you go. That's a drawing. It looks kind of like what you see in the photograph, but I want to enhance some of these. Instead of having these two faces look as though they're both receiving the same amount of daylight, I want to make one brighter than the other. I've been talking about that throughout the semester. And so this is a good example of a rounded corner really being enhanced with the idea of graphite because I can move this and I can have that gradient happen much more easily than any other media, with the exception maybe of watercolor could do something very similar. So here you can see I add tone to that face and then it turns the corner and it naturally creates that gradient. It turns the corner and it becomes much brighter. And in contrast, this is coming to a point or a corner, a strong corner here. So I'm just going to come across and stop that shading. But one thing I want to do here, I'm going to actually create a shadow on the building itself by taking that down and connecting it back. So that whole space is in dark shadow. The one thing here to consider is the darkest elements here is this very, very heavily fritted or tinted glass, which reaches all the way along the street face. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to just add a little bit of tone and shadow to each one of these, and then spending a little bit extra attention to the recesses inside these balcony edges. I haven't spent any time cleaning up the drawing. After I've done my initial pass with the construction lines, I didn't go back and erase them just because in the effort of time here, I'm kind of ignoring that for now. And I drew them light enough that they shouldn't become so evident in the final drawing. I could do a light wash here because this is a darker material, almost like a slate color, gray, dark gray. And if I look very closely, I can again see Ronan is using a corrugated material here with a lot of horizontality to it. If I want, I could come back and just do a lot of these kind of broken lines that go between the windows and then extend beyond. But the thing is, when you do this, you have to understand that that also has to be resolved at this corner. So I drew that. It's much easier to draw those little lines as they are horizontal and parallel to one another, but then as you get to this corner, they have to start to arc. And the arc becomes more and more flattened the closer to the horizon line you get. You can go back and do this. I'm going to add, even though it's it looks like the shadow is in the opposite direction here. You can see that shadow coming down from this building. I turned it so that I'm actually showing shadow coming down in this direction, just to emphasize the difference in tone between these two faces. So I don't want to do the same thing here because that would be confusing if I started showing that the daylight is coming in two different directions. And I can add tone to my context building here. I'm using a this other pencil. I have two pencils here with me. One of them is very soft, and that can give me a lot of those deep tones. And the other pencil I have is hard, maybe like a 3H or a 4H, which allows my pencil to stay a bit sharper. And it also allows me to get some of these very fine lines. If I tried to do this with the B pencils, the soft graphite, I wouldn't be able to maintain these kind of crisp lines, and then they would look much darker, which is not the what I'm going for on this. I want these to kind of become background, just suggesting a pattern in the back. And then the further away I get, the more they collapse, and eventually I could just make that a tone. Don't have to worry about the spacing of them all. They just kind of collapse into a singular volume of tone. Always try to come back and add that little bit of life to the foreground here, because otherwise it looks forgotten. And then finally, again, I have a very well, a light colored building, and the sky is, at least in the photo, looking rather dark compared to the white metal panel or the gray. So I've been ignoring a lot of the teaching of rendering skies. To this point, it's really just been a tone that I move with my finger to kind of create a blended, even surface. Try to hold that edge of the building to make the darkest area of a sky, and then as you get away from the face of the building, it lightens up. And then I leave those gaps between areas where I blended so that there's this idea of a lighter kind of very not well, there are different ways, of course, to draw clouds, but I'm not giving them much definition. Sometimes I come back and add a little bit of darkness to the underside to kind of give them the idea that there is a shadow underneath the cloud, like that. But it's very delicate to do clouds that without a lot of practice in doing that look really realistic. You can end up just drawing lines and they don't look like a three-dimensional cloud at all. And I also sometimes come back with an eraser. You can create more those kind of large scale clouds that kind of build up in form as you move higher up into the sky. You can do that with an eraser as well. If you have a lot of tone, let's say you move a lot of this graphite. I'm not very architectural of me to be using my finger all the time. I should be using a blending pencil. This is more of the art side of it. But then you can come back and erase and create some of those larger forms of clouds that are more this kind of columnar clouds that reach high up into the sky that reflect a lot of sunlight. And then once you have that form, you can, like we do with the architecture, come back and just add a little bit of shadow, subtle though, always building up, not doing too much erasing. But you can see that then they take on this three-dimensional form, and then the bottom side is in shadow. That's darker. So there's a subtlety to it though. And it's always good if you're interested in drawing this kind of thing to look at examples of other successful renditions of clouds. And I have not touched on it because it's not the kind of thing that I think is important for an architectural class. But sometimes if you want to reach out and look at examples of good drawings, not just for architects, but just drawing standards in general, it might be worth taking a look at how to render this kind of thing because it does play to the context and the kind of believable atmosphere that you're creating. And I've misplaced at the moment my kneaded eraser, which would help me to avoid all this mess that I'm creating in my drawing. Just add that. This is really for those of you interested. I don't think that this is really the kind of thing that you have to do for this drawing exercise unless you're interested in adding a little bit something that you haven't done before. Given this is our last lecture, I just wanted to point this kind of thing out. Some of you have been drawing a sky that looks like just random, like strokes of a pencil that I can see. And that doesn't really look very good. It looks kind of like well, not very well thought out. So this is just the way I have been doing things in the past. So I just wanted to let you know about that. So that you could always come back and add a little bit of contrast or maybe this owl. Because once I add that background for the clouds, everything else becomes a bit more muddy. So I have to come back and realize what do I want to really emphasize. This side should really be dark, darker than what I see in the sky. Okay, so I guess that's really the end here. I just wanted to finish by saying these are examples of drawings done very, very quickly. Unlike the other drawings that we've done throughout the semester, these three are very simple, fast, easy to draw, just the basics that we've talked about all semester, and then just adding a little bit of quickness to it. The ideas are still the same, but I thank you all for being a part of this class this semester. I hope that you've taken away some things that you can utilize in your own designs and maybe something that you can use when you are in the design process, not just representing it in the final condition, which I'm assuming most of you will probably end up doing through computer means or renderings that are digitally created, but fast ideas just coming off the top of your head, getting on paper. I think that drawing has certainly a place for that in the profession and as well in school, as much as it may not be emphasized or taught as it once was. I think that I certainly use it as much as possible, and it is definitely something that I come back to again and again. And it is a valuable tool that you will be able to utilize after you're out of school and you're practicing as an architect. It'll differentiate yourself, and you can utilize it uh, all the way through construction, not just in concept or idea making, but also in explaining ideas to others that are not familiar with what kind of options we have. How can we make something more buildable, effective, true to the design intent, rather than saying, I'll come back to you, in 3 days with an idea that I can render or something that I can draw on the computer with nice clean lines. Just getting ideas down that people really appreciate that idea, the ability to create right away on site without the help of a computer. So I thank you again for joining me through this journey in this class, learning some of the principles. I was happy to share some of the tools that I use and the methods that I use. So I wish you all the best, and we will be one last thing. The final exam will be posted on the 17th. You will have 24 hours to complete that. It'll just be a simple image, much like I've been drawing on these three today. It'll just be a singular image like we have with the in-class demonstrations, the 24 hours. You just post it on the 18th and it will be closed. So unlike the design discussions that we have for the in-class tutorials, it will be closed and it cannot be reopened. That's kind of like the standard window of time that you have to complete a final exam. So please make sure that you finish the exam. It'll be worth 20 points, and it will be, so that's a large chunk of the final grade. So just make sure that you get it done on time. So thanks again, everyone. I hope this has been a help, and it was a pleasure being with you each week talking about this, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So good luck to each of you as you go through your school and later into the profession.